as she realizes that her life is ending, she's trying to tell him your ability to love is an important part of who you are.
Welcome to the Wisdom of the Body podcast. I'm your host, Heather Grzych. Here, we talk about the profound connection between mind, body, and spirit. Join me and other authors, wellness experts, and everyday individuals talk about the importance of listening to our bodies, trusting our guts, and living in deeper harmony with nature. So, whether you're seeking guidance on your wellness journey or simply looking for inspiration, you're in the right place. We're thrilled to be in the top 3% of podcasts globally. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and most other places where people listen to podcasts. You can follow by joining my email list at heathergrzych.com or by following me on Instagram at Heather Grzych. That's Heather, Grzych. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today I'm here with Sam Sussman, who is the author of the USA Today bestselling debut novel, Boy from the North Country. The novel was named Oprah's most anticipated debut novel of the fall, 2025, hailed by Kirkus as the most beautiful and moving mother-son story in recent memory. And Sam was recently profiled in the New York Times. Boy from the North Country is based on Sam Harper's magazine memoir, The Silent Type, on possibly being Bob Dylan's son. Sam graduated with a BA from Swarthmore and an MPhil from Oxford and has lived in Jerusalem and Berlin. He lives in Yorkville neighborhood of Manhattan and his native Hudson Valley. Sam, let's get into it today.
Hey, Heather, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk with you about this book, and I read it and was so touched and moved seeing you speak in San Francisco recently. And there's a lot about this book that touched me, a lot that I really related to as a holistic healer with a son, as we'll get to learn about the main character of your book, which is based on your mom. But I'd love for you to just start with, in your own words, can you tell us here today, what is the Boy from North Country really about? I think it'll be better for you to summarize it than me.
Uh, I think it's Boy from the North Country is the story of a man who searches for a father and finds his mother. That's the simplest way to describe it. It's the story of a young man named Evan who grows up in the Hudson Valley with his mother, and from this ambiguity about the identity of his biological father, from a young age, he's told that he looks physically like Bob Dylan. He then learns that his mother had an affair with Dylan, and um, but she won't say more than that. And she tells him that the relationship went on up until the year before Evan was born, but she won't answer more than that. Evan leaves home and tries to become the person and artist he wants to be, spends most of his 20s abroad. And then when he's 26, his mother becomes sick and he goes home sort of as an adult. And for the first time, they have to face the silences in their lives. And it's really about how this search leads Evan closer to his mother, um, and how that time that they spend together as adults transforms their relationship.
Wow. Yeah. And the story in the novel is based on real life events, although it is a work of fiction, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like everybody must automatically want to go to the elephant in the room, which is, are you, tell us about Bob Dylan and let's talk talk about Bob Dylan And I want to maybe just sort of get that out of the way and then go back to the relationship of the story of the boy and his mother. And when you were writing this book, it was a time when that Dylan movie was like coming out, the one with like Timothy Chalamet. Was that kind of like haunting you during this process, or like was it getting you excited about getting it published? Because you probably had already written it by the time that movie was coming out and going through the publishing process. What was that like in that period?
Yeah, the film didn't have any place in my mind as I was writing, and the film came out in December 2024. I made the last edits on the novel in September 2024, 3 months before. Um, so I knew that there was this film coming out, but I didn't know anything about it more than other people knew. And there's so much out there about Dylan and films, books. Um, what
Mm-hmm.
was really important to me was that I write my story and my mother's story and tell it on our terms. And, you know, we see Dylan in this book really through June's eyes. And, people ask me, did you research everything you could about Dylan in the period you were writing about him? And
Mm.
I did a little bit, but not very much, because my mother and Dylan met in 1974, and they had a relationship that took place over one of the most musically formative periods in his life. He was in this moment of personal and artistic crisis, and she was with him as he sort of wrote his way to the songs that became Blood on the Tracks. And we see that in the book, but we just see it from her vantage point, and it's really her story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are always trying to possess Dylan in some complete way, and it's such a futile project because right. And so no, I wasn't thinking about anyone else's
Mm.
version of him or account of him. It was
Mm-hmm.
just, how does he appear as he walks through June's line of vision?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we never. It's interesting when people are so famous, or even people who are not famous. We think we know them, and even like your mother, right? We think we know a parent, and I think that's one of the really transformative things that the story talks about is what we say to each other, and then also the things that we don't tell each other, that may or may not come to light. And the process of, so in the novel, June is the mother, and she is um, dying of cancer, and she doesn't tell her son for a really long time that that's happening. And then she tells him at some point, and I love, there's just something so fascinating to me that this is happening at age 26, because that's the age when everybody considers adolescence to end. It's like the age when you fully step into like being an adult, though I didn't really feel like an adult, I think, until I was 30. But you know the transformation that goes on in the relationship between the mother and the son in this novel through the cancer journey is so beautiful. And I know that since this is based on your mom and you, and your mom is a real person in the book, she's also a healer, holistic healer. And this is a podcast by Heather, who's a holistic healer. It's just, it's this, I, I think about you almost in some way, like, because I have a son, right? I'm a holistic healer that has a son. And so when I was reading your book, I was thinking, oh wow, like there's something that I really relate to here, in this mother and son relationship. And from your perspective, what do you think, and maybe there isn't a supposed to here, but Do you think that there's something we're supposed to learn from June in this book?
Well, thank you for all those wonderful words about the novel. I think the first thing I'll say is that this is a book that's rooted in a very universal experience of coming into an adult understanding of who our parents are before they were our parents, beyond the fact that they're our parents. And it's such an interesting human relationship because we meet our parents when we can't see them through anything but our own needs, right? That's we're born. We and time goes on, you grow up and you start seeing your parents slightly differently. And if you're lucky, you might develop an adult relationship with a parent and come to understand their life not only as you've perceived it, but as they've perceived it or close to. And this is really about a son's journey toward understanding who his mother is, who is this woman who has raised him and made him who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And I my mother used to say something, that a line that I give to June throughout the novel, which is that we're here to take the pieces of the universe we have been given, burnish them with love, and return them in better condition than we received them. And if there was one sort of spiritual driving force of the book, it was that idea for me. And, I thought a lot about those words after my mother's death. It was a very bleak time of grief in my life. As you say, I was 26. I was trying to understand how to make sense of this experience. It
Mm-hmm.
felt like the most difficult piece of the universe that I had been given. And I thought about how my mother related to the most harrowing experiences of her life. And, I mean, she was subject to horrific sexual violence at the hands of men, which I write about in the book. And what she did with that experience over time was to draw on it to help other women who had been through similar experiences, and to use her own healing journey to help other people heal. And I wanted to write a book that would be candid about the experience of grief and loss, but a book in which the love would be larger than the loss, and a book that might be meaningful or hopeful to other people struggling with their own grief. So if there's one sort of idea that runs through the book or animates it spiritually, it's those words from my mother. And
Mm.
it's the idea that we can draw on what has been painful in our lives and make meaning out of those experiences by being closer to other people, by giving love to other people.
Was there a part of you that felt, or that she, or either one of you, did either one of you feel like this is, I'm a holistic healthcare practitioner. This just doesn't seem right, or this seems unfair, or this seems like ironic in some way. Did that come up in the process?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that, and I asked her those questions because my mother, who was just someone who was so devoted to health and healing, and something that she would talk to me about. I remember once saying to her, there's a scene in the book based on this conversation where I say to her, this is so unfair. You've spent your whole life living, being as healthy as you can. For you to have this cancer at 63, it's just so unfair. And she said it was the other way around. She said, I knew cancer ran in my family. My grandmother had cancer. My mother had cancer. She knew from the time that I was very young that she had the BRCA gene. And so she knew that the chances that she would develop cancer were always high. And that was one of the reasons that from a young age, she was so devoted to health and learning all she could about how to live the healthiest life. And, she would say, babies get cancer, saints get cancer. Nobody
Mhm.
is immune. That's part of life. And, you know, she also understood that having a certain genetic makeup doesn't predetermine life, right? That everything we know about epigenetics is that the way that genes do or don't manifest, or the likelihood that they manifest, is also based on our choices and how
Mhm.
stressed we are or aren't, how well we eat and sleep, how
Mhm.
content we are in our lives, how much we're reaching for happiness and for love. And for her, those were the great sources of health and healing. And for her, that's what it meant to live the fullest life, and not define that life by whether she might or might not be ill, or her life might end sooner than she wanted it to.
Mm. Yeah, there's almost like, I have this weird vascular abnormality in my finger, which like has kind of changed my life actually. And I didn't find out about it until I was in my 40s. Like a lot of people that have this kind of vascular abnormality, they'll like end up getting the body part amputated that it's on. It's like this weird thing. And I remember when I learned about it, it really changed how I started to live my life. Like it was always on my mind. It really affected me. And there was a part of me that wondered, like, if it would have been better. Well, because I didn't know about it until I was 40 or 41 or something. And I had lived my life before that, not knowing it was there, even though it was always there. It just wasn't like so bad. I actually feel like super grateful personally that I didn't know it was there because I feel like it got on my mind so much. Um, that this thing was there, and it was like ignorance was bliss before. But one of the most beautiful things I love about any kind of holistic healing is that it gives you a sense of, oh, there's something I can do about this.
Yeah. That's
And
my mother.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, that sounds like to me what happened with your mom, where she felt like, oh, I don't feel like a prisoner to this.
Yeah, my mother would always say that. Her A line she used, she would always say, "Much more is possible than you think." And many of the clients she worked with as a holistic health practitioner were people who felt that they had been told there's nothing that we can do, or there's no way to approach that. And often, what was really being said to them was that there's no definitive cure, which is different than there's no way to change your diet or your sleep pattern or your lifestyle to be healthier, right? And
Mhm.
so much of my mother's work was rooted in the intersections of our relationship to ourself, the food we eat, the way we sleep, the way we relate to others, and then, of course, intersecting that with conventional medicine. But like many holistic health practitioners, she wanted to expand the way that we think about our bodies and minds, um, and help people live healthier lives. And for her, so much of that had to do with the way that each of us relates to our own health, right? And if
Mhm.
we say, oh, there's just nothing that can be done, the doctors told me there's nothing that can be done, right? That's a really limiting way of experiencing our health. Whereas if we can shift that into a way of thinking of, what is actually different if I eat in a more healthy way, if I sleep more consistently, right? All, as she said, much more is possible than you think.
Yeah. Do you feel like you learned a lot from your mom? Did it ever make you want to go into holistic healthcare or medicine at all?
I learned so much from her, and people always say to me, "Oh, you eat so well. Why don't aren't you tempted by all of this, you know, less healthy food?" And you know, I'm not. I mean, my mother, like, for her, there was nothing better than, a freshly sautéed eggplant, or, the vegetables that were local to the area in the Hudson Valley where she lived. And um, there's a scene in the book where um, I say to her, like, haven't you ever had a craving for something sweet? She says, like an apple. And that I've sort of become that person now, and I'm so grateful that so much of my own relationship to my health almost comes naturally because I grew up with her example, and I don't know any other way. And so much of what my mother was trying to teach was that eating healthy, having a healthy lifestyle, it's not a chore. It's not about denial, that it's actually a great pleasure. It's a pleasure to feel good, to have more energy. It's a pleasure to eat locally grown foods. And, sometimes my mom would sort of look at some overly saturated or sugared food and she would say, like, that's so disgusting. People eat that. And she really
Yeah.
felt it. And I
Mhm.
sort of feel the same way. Sometimes I look at some processed food and I think, like, people think that's a treat. No, a treat is an organic peach. So I learned enormously from my mother. I you know I My form of healing and self-expression has been more artistic and is in my writing rather than practicing holistic health. But I've come to see as those two things as deeply interconnected. And my mother had a life as an actress and painter before she was a holistic health practitioner. And I think the way that she taught me to think about art was through a lens of healing. And my mother believed that stories were essential to our health, right? That the story we tell ourselves about who we are, our self-esteem, that impacts you know all of the cycles of our health, how we eat, how we relate to other people. And I've come to believe and feel and appreciate all of that so deeply that the first story that we tell is the story of our relationship to ourselves and who we are, and that is at the foundation of our health.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I really relate to that, being a person that is a holistic healer, used to be an actress, is writing a sci-fi novel now. And it's like you sit there and you try to make sense. Like, why am I how what do all these things have in common, and the 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 essence of it all. And also I think the stories and also this aspect of like making the unknowns known, which can happen through there's so much that happens somatically through the body that our conscious mind is not involved in, which can basically find its outlet in art, can find its outlet turning in a yoga pose or having some body work procedure done on you that gives access or a release to something. And so they really are related.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I think so much of what my mother cared about, the way she thought about health, was the relationship between the mind and the body.
Mm,
And her ideas were that so much of sort of our negative behavior in health is driven by an absence of self-worth, right? A sense that things can't be different than how they are. And that's a story that we're telling ourselves about our lives. And where she would feel, if we tell ourselves that we deserve to be healthy and happy and loved, that informs how we relate to every part of our health and to the people around us. And of course, that can't cure you from every illness, that can't insulate you from being human,
mm.
but it can give you a healthier life. Um, yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple of things in here, just because it's a story of your mom and the cancer journey, and the cancer journey being incredibly difficult to experience and also witness. Um, I My grandmother died of cancer when I was quite young, and I remember going through that process. And you write about it so vividly. I mean, all of it, and I I was really pleased with the graphic detail that you put in about the things that your mother was experiencing. And I just think that's like such a huge gift, for people to be able to understand that process, and the visuals, the smells, everything, of that process. I really picked up on how you did that. And um, yeah, there's a reason that like people have "fuck cancer" t-shirts. It's like a really nasty, awful thing for people to go through. And I remember how hard that was with my grandma. And I can't even imagine. My mom's still alive, and I like every time I even think about my mom not being there, I like tear up because I love my mom so much. And was it hard to write this story because of the level of emotional attachment and closeness with your mom, who the character was based on?
Well, thank you for those kind words, and I'm really sorry to hear about your grandmother. That's such a
Mm,
difficult experience to go through at any point of life, but especially as a
mhm,
teenager. I think for me, I really needed to write this book. I needed a place to put those experiences. And, our culture isn't always the best at finding places to have meaningful conversation about loss or grief, or even just the experience of being with someone as they're going through treatment and then dying. And I wanted to write candidly about that, but I also wanted to write about it in a way that wasn't just morose, but that also found the joy and the love in that experience. And, like one of my favorite parts of Boy from the North Country is the chapter where the character based on my mother and the character based on me smoke her medical marijuana together. And, we recite poetry and get high and talk about our lives. And at the end of that scene, June, the mother, says to Evan, the son, um, I feel grateful, grateful to the cancer. And, and he says, what? And she says, you wouldn't be here without it. And that's what my mother was like, in that she could find the redemption in any experience. That was not her saying, I'm happy that I have cancer. That
mhm.
was her saying, I have cancer. That's my life now. And I'm grateful for this moment that we've experienced together and this love. So I wanted to write about all of that experience. And I also wanted to write about the experience of being with her in the very last days of her life, and knowing that our time was dwindling and that every moment mattered. And, the novels that I love most sort of go to a place emotionally that maybe we don't talk about every day in our lives. And I think that's what all of the most compelling art is doing. It is asking us to think deeply about parts of our lives that might be easier not to think about. And so I wanted to describe, well, what is it like being with the person you love most, and knowing that their time is coming to an end, and just sharing language. And then there isn't language anymore, but there's still a palm, um, holding each other's hands, or just looking at each other. And I wanted to capture all of those moments of love.
Yeah, and you said it earlier about the difficulty of grief and loss. And it's I've seen different statistics on this, but the bottom line is that humans feel loss more than we feel gain. So if we are given $1, or let's use a bigger number that like we could have a reaction to. Somebody gives us $1,000 or $10,000. $10,000 they give us, but say somebody takes away $10,000, that feeling of loss is so much stronger, and it's so strong, like it's magnified. um it's so much stronger that people even have a fear of attachment because of a fear of loss, because maybe they've lost something before and they don't want to get close to something because they don't want to lose it again. And did that theme come up in this book at all? Or has that been a theme maybe since writing this book or since experiencing that with your mom, the loss of her?
Well, it's something that June is telling Evan at the end of the book. She says to him at a certain point, um, nothing is more frightening than attachment, but nothing is more holy than love. And, there have also been a number of men who have passed through their lives, and June is conscious that this has made Evan skeptical of romantic love, and he's sort of had more casual relationships in his 20s. And she's trying to say to him, I know this has been difficult in your life, but it's something worth trying to overcome. Um, and I think she's also, as she realizes that her life is ending, she's trying to tell him, um, your ability to love is an important part of who you are. All right.
Mm,
And Evan is sort of so focused on, he wants to become a writer. He's left home. He's gone to Oxford. He's lived his 20s abroad. And she says at one point, um, you've always been intelligent, but it's your heart that makes you special.
mm,
All right. And so that is sort of what she's trying to impart to him. And at the one point, she quotes the great Jewish proverb that she says, it is not upon you to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. And she's saying, I know I didn't finish the work. I didn't model a loving relationship for you, but this is now yours. I didn't finish it, but this is you have to take this and live by it. Um, so that's a very deep theme in the novel.
mm. I mean, she did model a loving relationship of a mother son.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sounds like very well. When you decided to write this as fiction, as being a person that wrote both nonfiction book and now I'm writing fiction, and the decision around that, like I remember going through a lot of turmoil internally about like what form something wants to take when it comes out. And I heard you say in a talk recently the Samuel Beckett quote. Um, what was it again? It was like the form that fits the mess or something.
Precisely.
You have to find the form that fits the mess. Is that what it was?
Yes,
I hope I'm
yes.
not messing it up.
No, no, that's exactly the quote.
I love Beckett. Which apparently, if you're in New York, I heard that Keanu Reeves, Bill and Ted are doing Waiting for Godot.
Oh, that's fantastic. I
You got to
just
go see
saw.
that.
Okay, that's great. I just saw F. Murray Abraham in Krapp's Last Tape in earlier this year at the Irish Rep, one of the great theaters in New York.
Oh wow, yeah, New York's great. So when you decide, I guess what played into the decision here of fiction versus nonfiction? How did you decide that?
Well, there were many reasons, and it wasn't really a decision. I always knew I was going to write this as a novel, and it's interesting because that I first wrote that memoir piece in Harper's Magazine that you mentioned earlier, but that was really the exception. It's not that this novel has been the exception to me as a memoirist. It's that short memoir essay has been the exception to me writing fiction. I spent my whole 20s writing two other novels and a short story collection, and that's always been how I've expressed myself artistically. And the novelists that I admire the most are those who are drawn from their own lives to elevate the details and experiences and observations of being alive into a story and into language. And for me, that's Proust and Knausgaard and Amos Oz. And Um, and then there were other reasons to write this as a novel, and the quote about the form that fits the mess I like to reference because the book opens with a question, which has also been a question in my life that I wrote this piece about in Harper's. That is Bob Dylan Evan's biological father? And I didn't. It's okay if people start with that question. That's natural. But I want to take the story to a place where the answer is that that's not the most important question, and this is the narrative arc and the moral and spiritual center of the book is about Evan moving past that question and realizing that what defines him as a person, everything he values in himself, is what came from his mother, the person who raised him. And so, what's the form that fits that mess? Well, it's a novel where by its nature it denies facticity. And
Mm-hmm.
so, of course, say I'm not going to answer the question about Dylan on a factual level, but I'll answer it on an artistic level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's one of those things in life where it's much more about what you learn from the experience than about the actual answer. And one thing that June is trying to teach Evan is that it's not the right question to understand who he is in the world, and that he has to have a deeper
Mm-hmm.
sense of identity than this biological relationship to Dylan, and he has to become his own person on his own terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, regardless of who your parents are, right?
Yeah.
Is there a part of the book that you wish your mom could read the most?
Mm, that's a wonderful question. I mean, I about a third of the book is told from the mother's vantage point, recounting this bohemian artistic life in 1970s New York, and I mean that is drawn heavily from my mother's anecdotes and stories. But of course, when someone tells you a story, they don't give you every single novelistic detail, and so of course I wish that she could read that and tell me how she thought I did in stringing her story into um, a narrative, a third of a novel. But I think maybe more importantly than that, I wish that she could read the descriptions of my vantage point of writing about her as a child. And there are sections of the book that take place when Evan is recalling being a child, and just sort of the distinctness of this world in which June has raised him. The world my mother created for me was extraordinary. We lived in the Hudson Valley, a dozen acres in the woods. It was a very quiet and peaceful world. We didn't have television. My mother somehow didn't let me know about the internet until I was maybe 12. And so the things that were cherished in that world were reading, writing, creative expression, and each other. And I think the older that I've gotten, the more that I've come to understand how deeply that experience shaped who I am. When I left home and I was in my 20s, I thought, oh, I'm different because whatever, I've lived abroad or but then you get to a certain point, you realize those experiences are cliche. Everyone has had that. That doesn't make you who you are. Made what's shaped who I am is really the experience of growing up there with her. So I wish I could read that she could read those parts that are so much a tribute to the world that she created.
Yeah, because it's what you grew up as fun, what was fun to you, what was normal for you was so different than the Muggle children. I mean, it's funny. I forgot that there's so many references to Harry Potter in your book, but it's true, and it's funny because I remember dating a guy years ago who was raised with a very similar background. And I remember feeling like these are the Harry Potter people. Like I was raised in the Muggle world, and these are really the Harry Potter people. And it was a very different life. And it really felt like you're in the same world, but you're just accessing a completely different dimension of it.
Hmm. Well, I'm not calling anyone else a muggle, but I certainly had a very magical childhood.
I was definitely raised a muggle. Even if you don't think it, I was.
Harry Potter is a really important motif in Boy from the North Country. My mother read that book to me when I was young, and when she was sick, I read it back to her. And the themes are so deep in that novel. Of course, when I was a child, I thought it was the story of, you know, kid who learns he's a wizard. How fantastic. And it is. But when I reread it to her as an adult, I really understood that as the story of what a mother's love can offer to a son. And I think, of course, that's always how she understood it. And I have great admiration for that. Those books, because they're for everyone. They're for children who love magic and want to live within that imagined universe, and they're for adults who understand the deepest questions in our lives are about love and intimacy. And there's something very profound in those books. I'll always treasure them.
And I don't know if you meant this, but I just had this realization about Evan and Harry Potter, the similarity of that Harry always had the protection of his parents in some way, even after they were gone, because he loses them so young. And somehow they're still there protecting him with the things that they either left behind or from behind the veil, that there's still a protection even though they're not physically there. I don't know if you meant to do that, but it feels like a strong parallel.
I did. There's a moment toward the end of the book. June is very sick and she asks Evan to get Harry Potter. And she's struggling to speak. She's in great pain. And she turns to a certain page and hands it to him and asks him to read aloud. And it's the moment where Dumbledore is saying to Harry that his mother's love will protect him long after she has died. And that comes at a moment in Boy from the North Country before June has acknowledged that her cancer is terminal, but
Mm,
it's her first way of beginning to acknowledge that her life is ending, but that what she has given to Evan will live on.
mm. See, and this is just this is the beauty of fiction, but I think this happens in real life too. Just the the way everything seems to work out. you know,
Well,
with
Paul
like a
Auster.
divine order of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah, Paul Auster has a great line where he says, "Stories happen to those who pay attention to them." And someone said to me, "Did your mother really play Hedda Gabler, the Ibsen character that in the 1970s portion of the story, it's about her relationship to Hedda?" And
Mm,
this person said to me, it's just too perfect that she's
mhm,
understanding all these parallels between her life and Hedda's life. And I said, well, it's perfect because she chose to make sense of playing Hedda that way. She chose to answer these questions in her life through playing this character, and she chose to interpret Hedda that way. And I think that's so much what Auster means. Stories happen to those
yeah.
um, who pay attention to them. And, I'm choosing to tell the story of my life or Evan's life through the lens of Harry Potter. I'm choosing to pay attention to that. And I think that's true of so many of the motifs or other artists or books or paintings or songs that are in this book.
Hmm. All right, Sam. Final question here today. What does the wisdom of the body mean to you?
Oh gosh. Well, I think it's being in touch with ourselves and our feelings. Something my mother would say all the time is that if something feels off to you, an ache or a creak or something like that, pay attention to it. It can be resolved, you can change it, but you have to be listening to your own body. So for me, the wisdom of the body, like so much wisdom in life, is rooted in listening.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sam. I really loved your book, and love meeting you in person, and wish you the best of luck on your journey here with this book, on your future books. And thank you so much for sharing your mom's story with the world and your story with the world through this beautiful medium. And if people want to learn about the book and learn about your work, what is the best way for them to look you up?
So you can find the book Boy from the North Country anywhere books are sold, and you can learn more about me at samevansussman.org. I have a newsletter, I'm on Instagram, all those good things.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. Visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.